The morning the trouble began, the air was heavy with the smell of pine and chlorine. I remember it clearly because it was the first Saturday in May, and around here, that's when the town begins to wake up from winter's long slumber. Folks dust off their porches, oil up the lawnmowers, and start making plans for summer. Out here in Cedar Hills, things move slower than the city, but word travels faster than a brush fire in August. I had just finished skimming my pool, a modest little thing behind my ranch-style house, nothing fancy, 20 by 40 feet, lined with faded blue tile that had seen better days. For me, that pool wasn't about luxury. It was about survival. Summers in our part of the South are brutal, and without a place to cool off, you may as well be working in a furnace. But more than that, the pool was my sanctuary. I'd lost my wife, Caroline, 3 years earlier. Cancer took her fast, too fast for me to catch my breath. She loved that pool. We used to sit out there with a glass of iced tea in the evening, watching the fireflies come out. After she passed, the pool became a place where I could still feel close to her, as if the ripple of water carried her laughter on the wind. That's why what happened next cut deeper than most folks will ever understand. It started with Karen. Her name really was Karen, though she lived up to the stereotype so well you'd think she was auditioning for a role. She was the self-appointed queen of our HOA, the Homeowners Association. Now, our HOA wasn't anything grand. It covered about 40 houses, all tucked into the cul-de-sacs of Cedar Hills estates. Folks bought in because they liked the idea of neat lawns and some sense of order, but nobody ever imagined it would turn into a tyranny. Karen made sure it did. She had her little clipboard, her reminder notices, and that smug look she carried like armor. She didn't just enforce the rules, she interpreted them, stretched them, and wielded them like a weapon. And for some reason I never fully understood, she had it in for me. Maybe it was because I didn't bend to her ways. Maybe it was because I kept to myself, refusing her invitations to those wine and cheese HOA meetings where everyone sat around complaining about each other's hedges. Whatever it was, she'd been circling me for months, waiting for a chance to strike. That chance came on the first Saturday in May. I was out front trimming the hedges when I noticed something odd. A few cars I didn't recognize were parked along the street. Young folks, loud music drifting from cracked windows, coolers being hauled into backyards. Cedar Hills wasn't the type of place where strangers just showed up without reason. I rounded the corner and froze. There they were, at least 20 people in swimsuits, hauling folding chairs, towels, and even a karaoke machine, heading straight into my backyard. I dropped the hedge clippers and stormed after them. "Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing?" A woman in oversized sunglasses turned around, her wide grin nearly splitting her face. "Karen." "Oh, don't get all worked up," she said, waving her hand like I was some stray dog. "We're just having a little neighborhood kickoff party. Thought we'd make use of the pool since it's community property." I stopped in my tracks, heat rushing to my face. "Community property? That's my damn pool, Karen. It sits in my backyard on my land. Paid for it with my own 2 hands, and I've maintained it every summer since. Nobody asked my permission." Karen's sunglasses slid down her nose as she smirked. "Well, technically, the HOA guidelines say all recreational facilities are subject to community use. And since you never submitted an exemption request, this pool falls under that category." It was nonsense, absolute nonsense. The pool wasn't even visible from the street. It had no shared access gate. But I knew in that moment she didn't care about right or wrong. She cared about control. The crowd of neighbors behind her started whispering, shifting their weight, waiting for the showdown. Some looked embarrassed, others eager for a free swim. "You've got about 2 seconds to turn around and get off my property," I growled, stepping closer. Karen's smile widened. "Or what? You'll call the sheriff. You know as well as I do that Sheriff Tate doesn't take kindly to troublemaking. And if I'm not mistaken, you've already been on his radar since that noise complaint last fall." She said it loud enough for everyone to hear, twisting the knife. My cheeks burned. That noise complaint had been a misunderstanding. My nephew was working on his truck late one night and someone called it in. But Karen had a way of making small things sound like scandal. Behind me, I heard the splash of someone jumping in. Then another. By the time I turned, 3 teenagers were already in the deep end, shouting and laughing like it was a public pool. My chest tightened. That pool wasn't just water, it was memories, it was sacred. And here they were, stomping all over it. I wanted to throw them all out right then and there, but Karen knew she had me cornered. If I laid a hand on anyone, she'd twist it into assault. If I called the sheriff, Tate would side with her. So I swallowed my anger for the moment. The party went on all afternoon. Music blaring, beer cans tossed carelessly near my flower beds, kids running through my house without even wiping their feet. I sat on the porch, arms crossed, jaw clenched so hard it ached. Some neighbors avoided my gaze. Others raised a glass in Karen's direction, cheering her on like she'd just won a battle. By sunset, the pool was littered with plastic cups and half-eaten plates of barbecue. The water itself was cloudy, a greasy sheen floating on top. Caroline would have cried if she'd seen it. When the last car pulled away and silence finally fell, I stood there in the wreckage of my own backyard. That's when I made the decision. If Karen wanted to claim my pool as community property, then I'd make damn sure there was no property left to claim. The next morning, I rented an industrial pump from the hardware store. The clerk gave me a curious look when I loaded it into the truck, but I didn't care. By noon, the pump was roaring and the pool water was gushing out into the storm drain, racing away down the street. Neighbors came by one, staring in disbelief. Some muttered, some shook their heads. A few actually smiled as if they knew exactly why I was doing it. And then Karen arrived. She came marching down the street in her tennis visor and pastel sweater, lips pursed so tight they nearly disappeared. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, planting her hands on her hips. "I told you it wasn't community property," I said calmly, though inside I was trembling with fury. "Now there's nothing left for you to use. Problem solved." Her face went red. "You can't do this. You're destroying a neighborhood asset. I'll have you fined. I'll have you thrown out of this community." "Good luck with that," I muttered, watching the last of the water drain away. The once shimmering pool now lay empty, a hollow concrete shell. Karen's voice rose, shrill enough to make the dogs down the street bark. "This is vandalism. This is a crime." And then, like I knew she eventually would, she pulled out her phone. "I'm calling 911, she hissed, jabbing the screen with her finger. "Let's see what the sheriff has to say about this little stunt." I stood there, sweat dripping down my back, fists clenched at my sides, as the sirens wailed in the distance. And in that moment, staring at the hollow pit where my pool used to be, I realized this was no longer about water, or parties, or even Karen. This was war. The sirens came quicker than I expected. Out here in Cedar Hills, a call to 911 doesn't usually get much attention unless it involves a gunshot or a barn fire. But when the flashing lights rounded the corner and cut through the dusk, I knew Karen had made sure this was treated like high priority. 2 patrol cars pulled up, gravel crunching under their tires. Sheriff Tate stepped out first, his broad belly straining against his tan uniform, his mirrored sunglasses still perched on his nose despite the fading light. Behind him, Deputy Owens trailed along, younger and leaner but with the same sharp, watchful eyes. Karen rushed forward, waving her arms like she'd just spotted a lifeboat. "Sheriff, thank God you're here. This man, this criminal, has destroyed community property. He drained our neighborhood pool out of pure spite." Sheriff Tate looked past her at me. He didn't say a word at first, just chewed the inside of his cheek and studied the hollow pit in my backyard. Finally, he drawled, "That true, Jack. You went and drained your pool." I squared my shoulders, meeting his gaze. "It's not our pool. It's mine. Built it, paid for it, maintain it. Karen here decided to throw a party without my permission, so I put an end to it. That's all there is to it." Karen gasped like I just confessed to murder. "He's lying. Everyone knows the HOA rules. Recreational facilities belong to the community unless formally exempt. He refused to file the paperwork, so by default, that pool belongs to all of us." Sheriff Tate scratched at his chin. "Now, Karen, I don't recall seeing any paperwork about pools in the HOA bylaw. Seems to me that'd be a private matter." Her face flushed deep crimson. "Are you saying you won't do anything? He ruined a neighborhood resource." "This is vandalism, Sheriff. It's destruction of property." I cut in, my voice low but steady. "You're right about one thing, Karen. It is destruction of property, but it's my property. And last I checked, a man can do as he pleases on his own land, so long as he ain't breaking any laws." For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. The only sound was the faint gurgle of the last bit of water draining down the street. Sheriff Tate finally nodded. Far as I can see, no crime been committed. Might not be neighborly, but it ain't illegal. Karen spun on him, shrieking, "This is outrageous. You're letting him get away with." "Karen," Tate interrupted, his voice sharp. "Enough. You file a formal complaint with the HOA board if you want, but this here ain't a law matter. Come on, Owens, let's roll." And just like that, the patrol cars were gone, leaving me and Karen standing in the fading light. She was trembling, her jaw tight, her eyes burning with a fury I'd never seen before. "You think you've won," she spat, pointing a manicured finger at me. "But you don't know who you're dealing with. I'll rally the entire neighborhood against you, Jack. You'll regret this day." Then she stormed off, heels clicking against the pavement, leaving me with the empty shell of my pool and a storm brewing in my gut. The days that followed were worse than I could have imagined. At first, it was little thing. A neighbor who usually waved when I drove by suddenly turned his head. Kids who used to ride their bikes past my yard now crossed the street to avoid me. The local diner, where I'd been eating breakfast every Sunday for years, suddenly lost my order and served me cold eggs after everyone else had been taken care of. It didn't take long to figure out why. Karen had been busy. She went door to door, spinning her version of events. To hear her tell it, I was a selfish old man who robbed the neighborhood of a shared resource out of spite. She left out the part about trespassing, the wild party, and the mess left behind. By the time she was finished, half the town looked at me like I was some kind of pariah. One evening, I found a flyer taped to my mailbox. In bold letters, it read, "Emergency HOA meeting, discussing action against Jack Miller's uncooperative behavior." Below that, Karen's name was listed as acting chair. I crumpled the paper in my fist. I'd never cared much for those HOA meetings, but now they were gunning for me directly. The night of the meeting, I parked my truck outside the community center and walked in, every eye in the room turning toward me. Folks I'd known for years, men I'd worked alongside on roofing jobs, women Caroline used to garden with, looked at me like I was a stranger. Karen stood at the front, flanked by her little entourage of yes-men and busybody. She cleared her throat dramatically. "As most of you know, our community has been under attack by one man's selfishness. Jack Miller here took it upon himself to destroy a neighborhood amenity, depriving our families of summer recreation." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. I raised my hand. "That's a lie, and you all know it. That pool was never a community amenity. It sits on my property. You've got no right to it." Karen smiled sweetly, her voice dripping with false concern. "Oh, Jack, you've always been so independent, but this isn't about independence, it's about cooperation, about community spirit. What would this neighborhood be if everyone just did as they pleased?" Her words were like poison seeping into the crowd. Heads nodded, whispers spread. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. What would you do if 20 strangers barged into your backyard, drinking, swimming, trashing the place, without so much as a knock on the door? Tell me that, Karen. The room fell silent for a heartbeat, but then she recovered, shaking her head. "That's not what happened. We held a neighborhood event, as is our right. And now, because of Jack's selfish actions, our children have nowhere to swim this summer." That hit home. Parents shifted uncomfortably, glancing at one another. A few glared at me. "What would you have done?" I asked, my voice cracking with anger. "If your own town stood against you, if people you'd shared meals with, worked beside, suddenly turned their backs because of one woman's lies?" Karen slammed her clipboard on the table. "Enough. I call for a vote. Should Jack Miller be fined for destruction of community property and forced to rebuild the pool at his own expense?" Hands shot up across the room. I stood there numb, as neighbor after neighbor sided against me. People I'd trusted, people I thought knew better. When the vote was counted, Karen's grin was triumphant. "Motion carried. Jack Miller will receive a fine of $5,000. If unpaid, further action will be taken, up to and including foreclosure of his property." Gasps filled the room, but I couldn't move, couldn't speak. $5,000, money I didn't have. My retirement checks barely covered the basics. I walked out of that meeting with a hollow feeling in my chest, the whispers of betrayal chasing me into the night. The next few weeks were a blur of isolation. Letters from the HOA demanding payment, neighbors avoiding me, strangers muttering as I passed in the grocery store. But the worst blow came one morning when I found my mailbox smashed, letters scattered across the ditch. Spray painted across the side of my fence were the words, "Pool Thief." I stood there, staring at the dripping letters, my heart pounding. This wasn't just about Karen anymore. This was the whole damn town turning on me. And for the first time since Caroline died, I felt truly alone. I sat on the edge of the empty pool that evening, running my fingers along the cracked tiles. The air was still, heavy with the scent of cut grass and honeysuckle. I thought about Caroline, about how she'd always believed in fairness, in standing up for what's right even when it's hard. My jaw tightened. Maybe I was just an old man. Maybe I didn't have much left to fight with, but I wasn't about to let Karen, or anyone else, take away the last piece of my life that mattered. Somewhere deep inside, a spark lit. If they wanted a war, then I'd give them one. The night after the vandalism, I didn't sleep. I sat on my porch with a lantern burning low, listening to the cicadas hum and the far-off hoot of an owl. My mind kept circling back to the words spray-painted on my fence, "Pool Thief." Funny thing, isn't it? I built that pool with my own 2 hands, dug the ground myself, poured the concrete, laid the tile. Caroline painted the fence around it the summer after. That pool was a piece of me. Yet somehow in this twisted little town, I had become the thief. I kept asking myself, how had Karen gotten such power? Was everyone really so gullible, or was there something else at play? The answer came sooner than I expected. 2 days later, a knock rattled my front door. It wasn't the kind of polite tap you expect from a neighbor. It was sharp, hurried, almost desperate. I opened it to find Mary Ellen, one of the oldest residents of Cedar Hill. She was widowed like me and lived 3 houses down with her little terrier, Max. Her eyes darted around nervously before she stepped inside. "Jack, I shouldn't be. If Karen finds out, she'll make my life hell. But you need to know something." I set a glass of water in front of her at the kitchen table. "Go on." She leaned in close, lowering her voice. "Karen's been twisting the HOA for years, but this time, she's gone too far. I was at that meeting because I didn't want to cause trouble, but afterward I went back through the bylaws. Jack, there's nothing in there about private pools belonging to the community. Nothing. She made it all up." I frowned. "Then why did everyone go along with?" Mary Ellen's lips tightened. "Fear and favors. You know Karen works at the county office, right? She's got her hands in everything: permits, property tax disputes, code enforcement. Folks are scared of crossing her, scared she'll make their lives miserable. She's been using the HOA to line her pockets, too. That $5,000 fine, it isn't going to fix your pool. It's going straight into her slush fund." The glass nearly cracked in my hand. "She's stealing from us." Mary Ellen nodded. "I can't prove it. Not yet. But I've seen too many special assessments vanish without explanation. People whisper, but no one dares stand up to her. Not after what she did to the Websters last year." I remembered the Websters, a young couple with a newborn baby. They'd packed up and left almost overnight. Word was they'd fallen behind on HOA fees and lost their house in foreclosure. "What'd she do to them?" I asked. Mary Ellen's voice shook. "She trumped up violations. Wrong mailbox color, grass too high, trash cans left out. Fined them until they couldn't keep up. When they fell behind, she sixed the board on them, took their home right out from under them." I sat back, stunned. It wasn't just me. Karen had been running this little fiefdom for years, ruining lives while everyone else kept their heads down. Mary Ellen reached into her purse and slid something across the table. An old leather-bound binder, worn at the edges. "What's this?" "The original HOA charter," she whispered. "My husband was one of the founding members. These are the bylaws as they were written 30 years ago, before Karen started editing. You read through this, Jack, and you'll see the truth." I placed my hand on the binder, feeling the weight of it. It wasn't just paper, it was a weapon, maybe the only one I had. Mary Ellen stood, adjusting her shawl. "Be careful, Jack. Karen's got ears everywhere. Don't let her know you've got that." After she left, I sat at the table long into the night, flipping through the yellowed pages. There it was in black and white. Pools, fences, sheds. Any structure built on private land belonged solely to the homeowner. The HOA had no claim over it. Karen's argument was nothing but smoke and mirrors. But that wasn't the only thing I found. Tucked in the back between brittle pages was a set of financial rules, strict guidelines on how funds were to be collected and spent. Every expenditure had to be logged, Every dollar accounted for. If Karen had been pocketing money, as Mary Ellen claimed, the charter proved she was breaking not just community trust, but the law. I leaned back, the binder open in front of me. My heart pounded with something I hadn't felt in weeks: hope. For the first time, I realized I wasn't powerless. The next few days, I kept quiet. Let Karen think she'd won. Let the neighbors whisper and avoid me in the street. Meanwhile, I made copies of the charter and began digging. I visited the county clerk's office under the pretense of checking property record. Sure enough, Karen's name popped up on more than a few questionable transactions: land sold cheap to friend, fees that vanished into miscellaneous accounts. Then I stopped by the Webster's old place. It sat empty now, shutters closed, weeds creeping up the drive. Through a dusty window, I saw the foreclosure notice still taped to the kitchen counter. The amount owed in fines was laughable, barely $2,000. They'd lost their home over less than what most folks spend on a used car. That night I spread everything out on my kitchen table: the charter, the notes from the clerk's office, the foreclosure paperwork. Piece by piece, a picture began to form. Karen wasn't just a nosy neighbor with too much time on her hands. She was running a racket, hiding behind the HOA to squeeze people dry. And I had the proof to bring her down. But I knew better than to go charging in blind. Karen still had the sheriff on her side, still had the neighborhood under her thumb. If I came at her head-on, she'd crush me before I got a word out. I needed an ally. That ally came in the form of Deputy Owens. I found him one evening at the diner, sitting alone with a cup of coffee. He looked up as I slid into the booth across from him, suspicion in his eyes. "Evening, Jack," he said cautiously. "Heard you been stirring the pot." "Depends who you ask," I replied. I leaned in, lowering my voice. "You ever wonder why half the town's terrified of Karen?" He raised an eyebrow. "You're not the first person to ask me that." That was all the opening I needed. I laid out the binder, the financial discrepancy, the foreclosure notice. His expression shifted from doubt to interest, then to something darker: anger. "My uncle lost his place to her 2 years ago," he admitted, clenching his jaw. "I always suspected something wasn't right, but Tate in her pocket. Every time I brought it up, he shut me down." I studied him carefully. "So what are you gonna do about it?" He hesitated, then leaned closer. "You give me time, Jack. I can't take her on alone. But if you've got the proof you say you do, maybe it's time somebody finally stood up to her." We shook hands across the table. For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight begin to lift. By the end of that week, the plan was clear. Owens would quietly gather records from the county office, files that showed where HOA money had gone. Meanwhile, I would bide my time, acting the part of the defeated old man, letting Karen believe she'd broken me. But inside, I was sharper than I'd ever been. Each evening I sat by the empty pool, binder on my lap, thinking of Caroline. I could almost hear her voice in the whisper of the wind urging me on. She hated bullets, she hated liars, and she would have told me not to give up. I swore to her memory I wouldn't. One Saturday morning, as the cicadas buzzed and the air thickened with humidity, I caught sight of Karen marching up my driveway. She had 2 board members in tow, and that same smug smirk plastered across her face. She didn't even bother with pleasantry. "Jack, the board has decided that if you don't pay your fine within the next 10 days, we'll begin foreclosure proceedings. Consider this your final notice." I took the paper she shoved into my hand, glanced at it, then folded it neatly and slipped it into my pocket. "Appreciate the warning," I said calmly. Her smirk faltered. She'd expected anger, maybe even begging, but instead she found only quiet resolve. As she turned to leave, she muttered, "Enjoy your house while you still have it." I watched her go, the fire in my chest burning brighter. Little did she know, her days of ruling over Cedar Hills were numbered, because I had the truth. And soon the whole town would see it. The 10 days Karen gave me passed like thunderclouds rolling in over the horizon. Every morning, I found myself half expecting another notice nailed to my door, another rock through my window, another smear painted across my fence. But the neighborhood was quiet, too quiet. It wasn't peace, it was the hush before a storm breaks. During those days, Deputy Owens and I worked in secret. He'd slip me files late at night in plain manila envelopes, copies of HOA financial statements, bank transfer, and code violation records. The more I read, the clearer it became. Karen had been robbing us blind. The HOA collected nearly $60,000 in dues each year. According to the bylaws, that money should have gone toward community upkeep, repaving the cracked tennis courts, fixing the streetlights, trimming the greenbelt. But the records told a different story. Over half the funds were siphoned into administrative costs. From there, it was a spiderweb of shady transfer, money funneled into shell accounts under names suspiciously close to Karen's relative, trips billed as conference expenses, thousands spent on landscaping that never happened. Owens laid it out for me one evening at my kitchen table, papers scattered between us. She's been running this racket for years. And Tate, he's been turning a blind eye, probably getting his cut. I clenched my fists. And all the while she's been tearing down families for missed dues, foreclosing on homes, taking everything from people who couldn't fight back. Owens nodded grimly. If we play this right, Jack, we can nail her, but we can't just dump this on the sheriff's desk. Tate will bury it. We need eyes, lots of them. I leaned back thinking, then we'll give her exactly what she wants, a stage. The following week, the HOA scheduled its monthly meeting. Karen had announced it with her usual flair, plastering flyers across mailboxes and boasting about important decisions regarding community compliance. It was perfect. I spent the morning of the meeting sitting at my empty binder in my lap, rehearsing what I'd say. My nerves were steady, but my hands trembled when I thought of Caroline. She would have been proud, I hoped, proud that I didn't let them crush me. As the sun dipped low and fireflies began to dance in the warm air, I walked to the community center with a stack of documents under my arm. Inside, the room was packed. Nearly every homeowner in Cedar Hills had shown up, eager to watch me get torn apart. Karen stood at the front, clipboard in hand, beaming like a queen addressing her court. Sheriff Tate leaned against the back wall, arms folded, eyes hidden behind those damn sunglasses. I took a seat near the front, ignoring the glares and whispers around me. Karen cleared her throat, her voice carrying through the hall. Thank you all for coming. Tonight, we'll be addressing continued violations by Mr. Jack Miller, who has stubbornly refused to cooperate with our community standards. As chairwoman, I propose immediate foreclosure proceedings unless the fine is paid in full. Murmurs filled the room. Some nodded, others looked uneasy. Karen turned her gaze on me, her smile sharp as glass. Jack, do you have anything to say for yourself before we vote? I rose slowly, every eye following. I let the silence stretch, let the tension coil tight. Then I placed the thick binder on the table in front of me with a heavy thud. Yeah, Karen, I said, my voice steady. I've got something to say, and I think the whole neighborhood deserves to hear it. I opened the binder, flipping to the original bylaws. 30 years ago, when Cedar Hills was founded, these rules were written down. They're clear as day. Anything built on private land belongs to the homeowner. That includes my pool. You all heard Karen say otherwise. She lied. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen stiffened, her smile faltering. She's been telling us our properties aren't ours, that we owe more than we do, but it doesn't stop there. I held up a stack of papers Owens had dug up. This is where your money's been going. Not to fix the lights, not to repave the courts, straight into Karen's pockets. Fancy vacations labeled as conferences, landscaping that never happened, tens of thousands stolen from every family in this room. A murmur rose, angry and confused. People craned their necks, whispering to one another. Karen slammed her clipboard down. That's outrageous. Lies. Fabrications by a bitter old man who can't follow the rules. But I wasn't done. I pulled the foreclosure notice from the Webster's old house and held it up. Remember the Webster, young couple, newborn baby. They lost their home, over $2,000 in so-called fines. You all know they were good people, and now we know why they had to leave. Because Karen wanted their house on the auction block, cheaper for her friends to swoop in and buy. The room erupted. Shouts, curses, angry voices overlapping. Karen tried to shout over them. None of that proves anything. You can't. But Deputy Owens stepped forward from the back, his voice cutting through the noise. It proves plenty, Karen, and it'll prove even more once it's in the hands of the county prosecutor. All eyes swung to him. He held up a folder of copies, his badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. I've seen the records myself, and I'll be delivering them first thing tomorrow. You're done. Karen's face drained of color. She looked to Sheriff Tate for rescue, but for once he shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her eyes. The tide had turned. The crowd that once cheered her now shouted her down. "You stole from us," someone yelled. "Made us pay for nothing," another cried. "You ruined families." Karen stumbled back, her voice trembling. "You don't understand, I was just..." But no one wanted to hear her excuses anymore. The weight of the truth had crashed down, and the queen had no throne left to sit on. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Karen was stripped of her position, her accounts frozen under investigation. The county prosecutor opened a formal case, and whispers spread that Tate might be dragged down with her for looking the other way. For the first time in years, Cedar Hills began to breathe again. The neighbors who once glared at me now stopped by to shake my hand, to apologize, to ask forgiveness. Some brought casserole, others just a word of thanks. And me, I went back to my quiet life. The pool remained empty for a while. I'd sit at its edge in the east, listening to the crickets, feeling the cool breeze drift across the hollow concrete. It didn't bother me anymore that it was drained. Somehow, it felt fitting. A clean slate. One evening, Mary Ellen stopped by with Max trotting at her heel. She sat beside me on the porch swing and smiled. "You did it, Jack. You stood up to her. Most of us were too scared, but you reminded this town what it means to fight back." I shrugged, staring out at the darkening sky. "I didn't do it alone. Couldn't have. Caroline always said bullies only win if good people stay quiet. Guess I finally listened." Mary Ellen patted my hand. "She'd be proud of you." I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat too thick to speak. By the end of summer, the board was rebuilt with honest folks. The stolen funds accounted for, and new bylaws drafted to make sure nothing like Karen's reign ever happened again. The community even offered to help me refill and restore the pool, free of charge. But I shook my head. "No," I told them gently. "Some things are better left empty. Reminds us what we nearly lost." Instead, I planted a garden in the concrete shell. Tomatoes, peppers, wildflowers that Caroline used to love. Where splashes and shouts once echoed, bees hummed and colors bloomed. It wasn't a pool anymore. It was something better, a symbol of survival, of justice, of peace hard-earned. And on quiet nights, when the fireflies sparkled over the garden and the air carried the scent of earth and blossom, I could almost hear Caroline's laughter. So if you're ever in Cedar Hills and you walk past an old ranch house with a garden blooming in a hollowed-out pool, remember this. Bullies can win for a season, liars can rule for a time, but the truth always finds its way to the surface. And sometimes, the best revenge isn't water splashing in a stolen pool. Sometimes it's peace.